Uh, I'm super nervous actually. I've never done this.
You are nervous, huh?
Yes.
I am the one who's doing it, so I should be the one who's nervous, yeah? You're saying you're nervous.
Because I'm used to doing with film celebrities and all of that. I have never done a commander, and I'm that most indisciplined person you can ever meet. So I'm like all nervous. Okay, I'm like,
No, yeah.
I woke up early. I'm like, okay, today's the day I'm going to interview.
Yeah, does it help to let you know that I am also very indisciplined? Does it make, you better or something like that?
Really? Really? Oh, that does make me feel better.
No, I was just joking. Yeah.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
the regular intro for the audience, whoever is viewing it.
Okay.
So he is Mr. Anish Anthony with me today, and he has served in the army as an Air Force wing commander for almost 18 years. That's how old a teenager will take to get his senses and maturity. So you've been there for that long, sir, and today we are in conversation with him on the occasion of Kargil Vijay Divas, and I thought, so about everything, the significance the Air Force played and your role, and how army life, serviceman life is still influencing you, and everything from the transition of army life to CEO, becoming a CEO. Everything.
So I'm not actually the CEO. I think there's somebody else who's the CEO of the organization right now. Vijay Arisetti. Again, he's an ex-squadron leader of the Air Force. Okay. He's the CEO of our organization, which is MyGate, or Vivish Technologies, as you might call it.
All right. We can, is it safe to call co-founder?
He is the main founder, and I am one of the founding members along with him.
Okay.
So we've been with him throughout since the beginning. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So, so to give you a small backdrop of myself, I was born and brought up in Hyderabad, and my primary and secondary education was in Hyderabad. And then I joined the National Defence Academy way back in 1993. And post that, and I was an Air Force operative, so I always wanted to become a pilot. And post that, I joined the Air Force Academy, which is at Dindigal in Hyderabad. Mm-hmm. And I opted for helicopters. Okay. And I was a helicopter pilot, and I passed out, or I got commissioned in 1997. Right? Okay. And after 1997, after you choose for your stream of helicopters, then you need to go for a specialized helicopter training. That is in Hakimpet, again in Hyderabad. Mm-hmm. So 98 is when I finished. 98 is when I finished my training in Hyderabad. Right? 97 from the Air Force Academy. And then 98 I joined for my specialized helicopter training, and 99 May is when I finished my specialized helicopter training, and I was posted to 117 helicopter unit, which is located in Sarsawa, right? And incidentally, that was when the entire Kargil conflict happened. And subsequently I have flown in Siachen, and I did a tenure there. Then I came back to I was in a couple of more helicopter units in Hakimpet and so on and so forth. And then subsequently I was posted to Air Force Academy as an instructor. Mm-hmm. And then in around 2018 is what I left the Indian Air Force after around 20 years of service. So I was commissioned in 1998, and 2018 is where I finished my 20 years of service with the Air Force. And then I moved on to my newer role, of working with startups. So a friend of mine from the Air Force, Vijay, he had opened up a startup in Bangalore. Okay. And that's when I joined him. Mm-hmm. And then we got on with an amazing journey of the startup world, the startup ecosystem, with MyGate. Yeah, right. And we are a pretty prominent organization right now, spread over India in around 21 cities. So that is probably my journey of the last 20-25 years.
You gave it like a trailer of a movie, so quick.
No, not actually. It was, but it was very exciting.
So I have to take you back bits and pieces. I have to stop there. I have to put some commas and exclamations.
Sure, yeah.
And
I have absolutely
to
pleasure.
know a little deeper everything.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
You've mentioned that generally whoever joins army, air force, navy, it comes from the generations. It runs in family. So
Yeah.
what was your inspiration? It was the family.
Yeah, so I am a third generation armed forces personnel, so to speak, right? So my grandfather was in the Indian Army, and when the 1971 war broke out,
Yeah.
my grandfather had three sons, right? My father was the middle son. My uncle, that is my father's elder brother, joined the navy. My father's younger brother joined the army, and then my grandfather decided, "Acha, two have gone to the armed forces. At least one should be back at home."
Okay.
So my father got left back at home, so to speak, right? So when I grew up, that there was this void which had to be filled, sort of a thing,
You
right?
felt FOMO, like we call it.
yeah. So my dad had this FOMO and had this ambition to join in, right? But it was, so being a third generation armed forces personnel, right? It was an aspiration from my end also to join the armed forces and make a difference to the country, sort of a thing, right? And when we were small, we used to hear a lot of stories from both my uncles, because my younger uncle, right, he was involved in a very famous battle called Battle of Basanta. And he used to come back home with all of these war stories, and come back home with stories. My other uncle used to come back with stories in the Navy, and we used to hear, these guys have lived their life. So little did I know that thode saal mein mera bhi Kargil hone wala hai. Right? Yeah, so maybe I got what I was hoping for, not in the right way or different way, but yeah. So we've grown up at home listening to all of these stories. So I'm essentially a third generation armed forces personnel. My son has now joined NCC, so hopefully there'll be a fourth generation after me. But it all depends on where life takes us.
Yeah. Where he wants to.
And also where that place that I stay is very close to Air Force Station Hakimpet.
Okay.
So when we were growing up as well, there was that thing also which keeps influencing you, because it is right just about a couple of kilometers away from my place. So we used to see aircrafts fly, and on the night when you used to, on the terrace, we could see these aircrafts taking off and landing, in the night sky.
Okay.
So that also tends to influence you a lot. So there was this culture at home of patriotism, nationalism, three generations of armed forces, staying close to an Air Force station. Maybe all of that adds up, and and good it turned out that way. I've had an amazing experience, an amazing life. Yeah. So that's how the culture is at home right now.
So is it safe to say that you noticing all the planes flying high from your balcony or terrace, that your uncles were from army and navy, so you thought you will experience this route? Is that
So the fantasy of flying, the thrill of flying also, it was always there. It was, and in those days, I'm very sure your parents all remember that flying in the air was something that was like beyond reach. I mean, like, if I have to put it aptly, right, like what Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos are feeling about going to space, right? At that point of time, in the late 80s, when we were growing up as kids, right, being a pilot and flying in the air was a big deal. Right? There was only Air India that was there. There was no other airline which was there, right?
Yes.
And the other option was the Indian Air Force, right? So flying was like a small child's dream come true, that kind of a thing. So that aspiration has always been there.
Amazing. I think even today, for every child, if they notice a plane flying high, they get starstruck by it. I guess for everyone.
Yeah, I think because naturally human beings are not meant to fly, right? Biologically also not meant to fly. So when you have that freedom, in the third dimension, right? When you can do a lot of stuff in the air, right?
Yeah.
So that itself gives a sense of, your imagination then starts to go wide.
Yeah.
What if I could do all of that stuff, sort of thing, right?
Oh, I haven't. Okay.
Yeah, so that inherent nature is always there, to go out there and do the impossible, to achieve, literally reach out for the stars, sort of a thing. Yeah.
Amazing. So that brings to my, that you've answered two questions in one go. So comes to a little serious level of question. Kargil war, like, what disagreements have led to this war, and how did the whole thing happen?
Yeah, so I think our neighbors, Pakistan and I, we've had disagreements all along, right? Right since partition, those
Since
disagreements. have been there,
1947,
right?
yes.
Yeah, and after the 1971 war, where we sort of won decisively and hands down, I mean, there was 1 lakh Pakistani soldiers surrendered, right? So since 1971, there's always been this simmering of revenge or trying to get back at us, sort of a thing, right? And which probably led at a certain point of time to the Kargil war to happen, right? So essentially, if somebody looks at the India map, right, and if you look at the northern borders, right, there is this Jammu area, which is Jammu Srinagar area, and then to the right there is this Ladakh area, right, and between them there is this road which connects both of them,
Yes.
and that road is the lifeline for Ladakh. So if you cut off that road, all material supplies to Ladakh gets shut down, except for, of course, air transport, and you can't transport so much material by air alone, right? Now Kargil falls right in between Srinagar and Ladakh, on Leh, right? And the mountains on top of that road. So if you are able, if you can visualize it, right, there are mountains and there is one road going under it.
Yes, yes.
The mountain tops is where that entire battle happened, right? So we always had the mountain tops with us, right? So during Kargil, what happened is that in the winter preceding that, generally all of these mountain tops are cut off from the rest of the mainland for almost for 3-4 months, because it used to be snowed down. There used to be 5, 6, 10 feet of snow, and you couldn't just come down, and there was no road to go up and come down. So people, what happens when winters happens, right? A lot of people, the Indian army sort of recedes back as the snow line comes down, right? And since it was inaccessible in any way from both sides because of the snow, right? And in that year when we were receding, right? The Pakistani army or the irregulars, they call themselves irregulars, right? They've still not acknowledged that their army is part of it. They were climbing up the mountain top. So the next year, which is 1999, right, when in the month of April, when the snow started melting and we started going up to reclaim those posts, we realized that they were already sitting on top. And if you look at it, right, I mean, if you're just imagining yourself sitting on the top of a mountain, right, and you're firmly entrenched there with machine gun posts and bunkers. Now anybody who's climbing up at around 14,000, 15,000 feet, right, breathing there itself is a big deal. Right? So if somebody is climbing up, it is very easy. You're just sitting ducks for them to fire at you.
Yes, yes.
Right? When we started going back and reclaiming our posts, that is when we realized these posts had been taken over by the enemy. And they started firing at us, and then we thought it was an isolated one-odd post which must have been taken over. But then subsequently we realized that it was a planned military activity, and all of those posts along that entire hill-top line, the ridge line, right, all of them were taken. And that is when the Kargil battle started. I mean, and since it was in the area of Kargil, it was called the Kargil war, right?
It's called Kargil war.
The army, inch by inch, we sort of, the army and the air force, all of them put together, we captured each and every feat had to be fought for, right? There were amazing cases of the Indian army moving up by night and not by day, right? Hiding behind boulders for the whole day, and then inching up, crawling up in the night. Right? So that is the kind of foot by foot war that was fought. The sacrifices that we have made probably are minuscule when compared to the people who have given up their life, and more importantly, the families who have been left behind, right? Hamara to kuch bhi nahi hai. I mean, those are the guys who really made it happen. And those are the true heroes. Those are the true heroes and warriors of the Kargil battle. So essentially, that is what Kargil battle happened. And today is the day. I mean, July 26th is the day when all the posts were recaptured. Right? So that is why we celebrate 26th July as Kargil Vijay Divas, the day we won Kargil back.
Yeah.
Right? So that is the significance of July 24th.
The day.
But the battle started sometime in end of April or mid-April. That is when we realized, and then we realized, we examined what is the entire extent of the problem, and then we sort of fought back and we got it back.
It lasted
3 months. It lasted around 2.5 to 3 months. Yeah, we still remember that day, and we were still in our training academy in Hakimpet, right? Helicopter training school. And at around 4 o'clock in the evening, we were flying, and we got a call saying that everybody will land back. ऐसे यार क्या हो गया? But we had heard news about this sort of event which is happening in Kargil, and we did not understand that it was. We did not realize at that point of time it was so full-fledged and so widespread. Yeah, but when we called that God to land back, and then we came back to the briefing rooms, and then when we had a sort of an explanation of what is going around and that kind of a thing, that's when we realized the seriousness of the problem. And then typically after your training stage, you have a month's leave, and we were said, "Ki nahi, kal niklo aap. I mean, you need to go back to your next unit to report there." And we wound up our entire training, and we went to our this thing base. We went to our unit, and we reported to our unit and started flying.
So, if I may ask, they have captured the ridges.
Yeah.
They have captured,
so we captured the ridges, the entire ridge line was captured, and they had the posts were there which were made, and they were stacked for like months. I mean, they were entirely kitted and supplied to last out the entire summer. Because again, when winter comes, again it becomes very difficult to climb up and recapture. Right? So they had climbed up there, and they had stocked themselves with enough ration, weapons and ammunition to last out the entire sort of a summer. In fact, the aim was to hold those posts right through summer till September, October. And September, October, again the snow starts falling. So then it would be in winters, you can't take back the posts. Right? So we had to go up, we had to finish this entire thing, but before July, August or September or something, before the winter starts coming in again. And by July end, we were able to do that.
So it is humanly impossible, like fighting from this direction. You are in the position of climbing upwards.
Yeah.
It is difficult, not impossible. I mean, you guys did it.
Yeah, obviously, the guys did it. Yeah.
That's where I'm guessing, I have no clue, Air Force must have played a huge role, because you guys can control from air. So how did that whole thing work out?
Yeah, so I think Air Force played a significant role predominantly on 3 or 4 levels, right? And all 3 arms of the Air Force, all arms of the Air Force were involved in that, all 3 streams, which is the fighters, helicopters and transport, all 3 contributed towards the entire thing in different ways, right? For example, the fighters were there, and we had easiest access to hit those bunkers from the top, right?
Yeah.
So what the Air Force planned was, they planned sorties, they identified those bunkers on the ridge line, on hilltop, and they would fly sorties to hit those bunkers pinpoint. So, but if you can imagine, right? Sometimes if you can see from the top when you're traveling in a private airline or something like that, right? Just imagine that you're seeing a mountain, right? And there is one point on the mountain where you have to drop your bomb into, right? Because anything which is left or right by 50 feet or 100 feet also doesn't make an impact. Right? You really have to hit that guy on the dot. Right?
Yeah.
Precisely, on the dot precisely to create maximum impact. Okay. So there were a lot of sorties that were flown towards that end as well. There are a lot of heavy equipment which were shifted by the transport aircraft, right? Just imagine the entire weapons, ammunition, manpower, equipment, all of that had to be shifted up front, and it had to be done fast, right? Because again, if the winter comes in and we're not able to take those posts by then, your difficulty level increases further.
Yes.
Right? And the fastest way to move all this equipment is by air. Because if you had to move by road, and that road itself between Kargil and Leh, right, that itself was under fire from them. So those guys were sitting on the top, and they could see the road down there, and at any point of time they could fire on the road.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So movement on the road itself was entirely cut out.
Oh, okay.
Right. So transport aircrafts were used very heavily there is a Kargil airfield also, right? So a lot of supplies went to Kargil airfield.
Okay.
A lot of supplies. Then Leh airfield was used extensively. A lot of supplies went to Leh, and Srinagar was used extensively. And then supplies were all brought towards Kargil, one from Leh side, one from Srinagar side, and the Kargil airfield itself. But the Kargil airfield can handle only small aircrafts, not the bigger aircrafts. So limited amount of troops, only special ops, special equipment was brought from there. So that is what the transports played. And finally, the places where nobody else can go or land, helicopters can land there, right? So getting that final, making that last mile connectivity, so to speak, right? or it could be medicines, it could be ammunition, it could be removal of casualties. If somebody's got hurt, somebody's got hit, somebody's got fired, getting that guy out of there and taking him to where medical aid is available, medical facility is available. Right? So all of these are now done by the helicopters. Right? So every arm of the Air Force was involved in this whole thing. And then there is this the technical branch of the Air Force, the guys who keep these machines working, right? They were like working day in and day out to ensure that these machines were in the air, right? Machines were serviced, they were serviceable, they were armed, they were refueled, and they were ready for combat whenever you wanted them. So then there was that entire machinery which worked. So I think it's a great example of how all the services came together to achieve an objective, especially when you know that the window of opportunity is very small. Because we know that winter is going to set in by September, October. And there is no, so unless we work together, we couldn't have done that.
We would have achieved that, So, you were in training and almost like not completely done with the training?
So we had finished training. Yeah, we had finished training. So we finished training in May. In May 1st or 2nd week is what we finished training.
Okay.
And by then, on May 27th, I think we lost the first aircraft. If I'm not wrong, May 27th is when we lost 2 helicopters from our own, from the base where I was posted, Sarsawa. We lost our first 2 helicopters on May 27th, if I'm not wrong. Mohilan and Kundir, the 2 helicopters which were lost there. And these were Mi-17 helicopters. And at that point of time, we thought that the intruders were irregular intruders and they had only small arms or small weapons for firing. That is, on that day we realized that they had even anti-aircraft guns also, or anti-aircraft rockets also with them. Right? So 2 of our aircraft were shot down, which led, so initially we said that helicopters are slower, easier to maneuverable, right? So we thought we'll take out those posts by helicopter, by using armed helicopters against it, right? But when we got shot at and we lost 2 aircrafts, right? That's when we changed the strategy to get in the fighters who used to fire from much higher altitudes, right? So 27th of May, I think we lost our 2 aircrafts in Sarsawa. So and from that point of time, it was like a full-fledged sort of a thing. So May 2nd week we finished, and by the end of May, we were like fully thick of, Air Force was like fully into the thick of battle sort of.
So, I'm pretty sure you must be in early 20s or something when you were part of it.
Yeah. So I was 20. I was 23. Yeah, 20, I was 23.
Oh, younger than me.
Years old. But I think there's a very high sense of maturity which comes in. Because you're not only responsible for yourself, but you're also responsible for the men that you lead. For the men that you lead, right? And so there is definitely a sense of responsibility, a sense of maturity, which gets accelerated when you're in that particular role at that particular age. You start thinking about a lot more than just yourself, right?
Yes.
There's more. Right? How can I get it done? That becomes primary to everything else, no matter what the cost to get it done, right? Kind of that kind of this is to start developing so early in that.
So I want to know, what was your experience at such young age? You might have not imagined that this soon you would be posted in a war site or something. Like when you stepped into training, you might have known that it's someday going to happen, but how is it getting into the war zone as like right after you completed your training? How was it day in and day out?
Nobody in all services, right? You always prepare for war. I mean, you're never unprepared. When you're not fighting, you're training. Right? At every point of time, you know that any point of time anything could come up. Right? Like something like this come up. Right? And being a 3rd generation Fauji, with my grandfather having seen the 47, both my uncles have seen the 71. It is sort of imbibed into you that you never know if anything could happen anytime. So it was not, of course, we were surprised that it happened now, but it had to happen at a certain point of time, right? So it was that kind of a thing, and I think we were lucky. We grew up faster, and we were, as you call it, baptism by fire. Ho gaya hamara moment you and yeah, we lost a lot of good friends, which is like which even today a lot of us at our reunions, we raise a toast to all of them. Yeah, you have a lot of not so good memories as well, but that's the price that one pays for one's liberty and retention of our Indian way of life, right? And there's a price that we pay. So when we were much younger and NDA, right? So we used to have this saying, right? What better way is there to die than for the ashes of your forefathers in the temples of your gods, right? So from the training stage itself, that it is there in you, right? So, come what may, we have to defend, protect our way of life, our Indian way of life.
And every Indian is more than thankful for everything you have done.
Yeah, see, I again, there's a difference in that, right? Everybody is doing their job, right? Especially at that point of time when India globalization had just hit India, right? The economy was booming. People were contributing towards the growth of that economy, right? And at every sphere, it is the whole nation is one big machine, and we are a part of that entire big machine, right? So, yeah, and every part is probably as important as the other.
You're very modest, sir. So that brings me to another question, that globalization was happening in the early 90s. So economically, we were not that great. So how did the funding happen to the army?
So I think essentially the army, like I said previously, right? There is always a possibility of war. War always happens. Element of surprise is one of the things of war, which the enemy wants to capitalize on, right? So the funding is always there. But yes, if you look at it, in retrospect, there were a lot of lessons that we learned out of the Kargil War, right? And subsequent to that, there were a lot of amazing changes which happened, transformations which happened inside the Army, Air Force, right? A lot of modernization which happened after the Kargil War. And finally, it is only in times of challenge that the cracks come out in the open, right? And then you know where there are shortfalls, right? Yes, within 2 months we sort of reclaimed what is ours, but it also helped us to identify a lot of things in the system which we could better, which would optimize better, right? Like mobile communication was just about coming up, right? So how do we get a parallel real-time communication setup within the armed forces, right? So all the three services embarked on this communication sort of a blitzkrieg where every last nodal end had to be connected with everybody else, right? And then we were early enough, thankfully, to realize that it is not only about voice communication, even data communication was important. And we're talking about in 2001 and 2002. Now internet and all seems, a way of life. Data is a way of life, right? But to create an infrastructure at that point of time, in 2001, where the entire armed forces are working on a self-sufficient WAN or a LAN, right? Our entire communication network is self-sufficient. We're not dependent on anybody else to have our communications going. And there are multiple levels of redundancies, right? So all of those architectures were probably set at that point of time, and people started looking forward, maybe as an outfall of the Kargil War, right? So cracks came up, and then we went up and we filled all of those cracks up, right? So I think in retrospect, that was one of the biggest takeaways of the Kargil War, right? What happened after the Kargil War? We went on this amazing drive of modernization of the entire armed forces. And many people think that modernization is only about buying latest aircraft or buying latest weapon, right? Creating that entire infrastructure for these guys to work on, right? That is true modernization. Right? Connectivity, communication, infrastructure, roads to reach that final post, right? Your ability to fight throughout the year, not only in summers, or your ability to overcome the weather conditions to fight throughout the year, right? That is also using modern methods. That is also a type of modernization,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
So
definitely.
that essentially happened from 99 onwards, in all earnest.
After
Right?
seeing that
And
one
funds,
conflict.
yeah. So that one conflict taught us that okay, we need to think in this direction as well, right? But yes, I mean, we also our morale was very high on the front when we heard stories of people contributing back home, right? People used to contribute money, people for the PM fund, Prime Minister's fund, people used to contribute all kinds of things. It was very heartening to see this kind of a support coming out from the entire nation, and it
Yes.
gave us that feeling that everybody is, you've got our back. And
Everybody's trusting in you.
we also have and we also have heard stories of um, a lot of neighbors coming together when we were there, to our families, and people would come and voluntarily talk and find out how our families are doing back home and things like that, right? So those kind of things really are the better memories of the conflict, right? So there was this emotional bonding which happened within the country as well.
Yes.
Everybody in the country
Everybody
it was a
came
very
together.
great bonding. Yeah, it was a very good bonding experience for all of them. As a national level, at the armed forces level, we were very happy that yes, I mean, a lot of people are thinking about us. At our family level, which was back at home, there were a lot of people who were coming together and sort of recognizing the kind of contribution that our families have done by sending people in the front and things like that. So at all levels, these are also contributions, right? Contribution is not only about money.
Yeah.
It's about how people treat you when you're not around.
Yes, definitely. So, as you were saying, from the conflict, you guys have realized proper infrastructure, how a complete modernization is required. So you might have seen from 1998 to 2018 the changes that army forces have gone through. So, like, if you can give a small brief about it.
Yeah. I think what we are now, firstly, it's incomparable to what we were in 94, 98, right? The entire, if I have to consider the armed forces as an ecosystem, right? There is a radical modernization which has taken place at every thread. It could be weaponization, it could be infrastructure, it could be communication, it could be the HR policies. When I say HR policies, how do I optimize my human resource or my manpower to the best, right? All of them have seen modernization, right? All of them seen drastical changes. I still remember, right, when we used to go out. So from our mother base, we used to go to detachments, right? From our unit, we used to go out to detachments. For us to get one phone call back to our commanders at our base, right? Sometimes it used to take us I know you will laugh at it because you're not used to that now, but sometimes it used to take us 6 hours just to get one phone call, right? And I know that today, right, you just have to just dial and you pick up the phone, right? It was not that case in those days, right? So if you're on the front, then you have to patch up. You have to ask the local exchange. The local exchange will patch you to Delhi. Then Delhi will patch you to your local base, and the base will then patch you to that extension, right? And at any point of time, if any one of those are busy, then the process starts all over again, right? And this was a manual process that had to be done.
Oh my.
So and it took really hours for on the communication. From that, I think cut to 2002 or 2003, we could just pick up a phone and dial to somebody. Right? We could just pick up a phone and dial somebody, and we thought that was so amazing, right? That I could just pick up a phone and we had seen that amazing transition which happened where if I want to talk to my commander or somebody who's in Delhi and I'm sitting up in the front, right? I used to pick up a phone, dial a number, and his phone will ring. And that was so amazing for us at that point of time. Of course, right now, in retrospect, it may sound funny to you.
No, not at all. I am that kid too. As a 95 born, I have seen the transition as you have seen as well. Not as serious as yours, but
But and then from that transition from a fixed landline, now we have our own Air Force cell, app cell we call it, right? Where it's a mobile phone. And on that mobile phone, now you can talk to somebody else on his Air Force mobile phone, right? Now this is not your classical mobile phone that we're talking about. This is an Air Force mobile phone, right?
Okay.
So I can talk to him on wherever he is. Now he doesn't need to be limited to his landline, right? So we've seen those kind of transitions, and really very healthy and nice transitions. When a lot of people who join now in the last 4-5 years, it is very difficult for them to probably imagine that old Air Force. Right?
Yeah.
But we really and in true sense, the armed forces today of the Indian armed forces are, in true sense, a great superpower, right? I mean, there is nothing that we cannot do, right? We engage in a lot of exercises with countries abroad, right? And we come out in flying colors, right? And we come out better at most points of time. So, in true sense, technological sense, early on people used to consider us a third world armed forces, right? Now we are a developed armed force right now, right? It is not about we are growing our I mean, we can take anybody head on, right?
I'm so sorry, but I have to request you to be a little louder, a little more louder.
Sure. Is it better?
It's better. You don't have to be that way. Just increase your pitch a wee bit. What is happening is like a song somebody is singing. You're going from this to this and between.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
A few words, you're just going off like that. So,
Sure.
The editor will find it real difficult. I am good. I can hear to all of it. You don't have to do it.
Yeah.
You just can. I mean, increase your pitch a little bit. That would do. That would help.
Yeah.
You don't have to stress yourself so much.
Cool.
Yeah. So, I also read about how media was broadcasting the entire thing live, and there were mixed reactions to that. It was sort of building up all the, nationalism inside everybody's home, and also broadcasting wasn't really helpful, was what I read, contrary to that.
So I think there are always two faces to every aspect, right?
Yes.
And multiple angles to always every aspect. So if you take one step back in the 1991 Gulf War, right? That was the first time when the video or live people were seeing what was happening in the war, right? And in 1999 when Kargil happened, the same thing what we wanted to do, right? So media was doing it. The Indian media was doing it for the first time, right? And like in anything else, right? There are always mistakes which happen, right? Yes, it should have been better thought about, right? Because when you're transmitting something live, right, there are a lot of, while you might be able to be successful in building up patriotism, you might be able to rally the entire country behind you, and the country knows what is happening out there, right? Reality is being reported. But we should also understand that, there are people on the other side also have access to what you are broadcasting.
Yes.
Yeah, so your broadcast of the fact, right, should not impact the cause or the purpose of the war itself, right? So that probably could have been done a little better, right? And maybe they must. So in fact, if you ask me, right, that is also another great takeaway from the war, from the armed forces itself, right? We started having PROs. We started having more, or rather, we had PROs, but it started becoming, they know now where to focus and what not to be done. So we learned a lot of lessons of what should not be done and where we should apply censorship, where we should not apply censorship, right? There has to be, at the cost of free press or free journalism, it should not impact the war itself.
Yes.
Right? So I think that is something we learned we created that filter, and we learned how to use that filter very effectively after the Kargil war. But yes, like all first times, there are definitely downsides to that as well. And obviously it should not have happened, right? There are impacts to that. But yeah, it may be, maybe we could have learned a lot from people who participated in the 91 Gulf War, or from agencies which reported the Gulf War, right? Maybe they could have a lot of lessons that we could have drawn from there, rather than just enthusiastically jumping and learning from your own mistakes. Maybe we could have learned from their experiences than learning from our own mistakes. Yes, definitely that would have been better.
That would have been a smarter move.
Yeah.
So, like, we are grown up listening to mythology, so I have this question from there only. Were there any timings like mythology, somebody blows a trumpet? I know this is dramatic. I don't mean it that way. So is there a trumpet?
No, I don't think it works that way. I don't think it does. It's all out. Yeah. So it's
anybody
it's all
can
out, right?
at any time.
Yeah. So there is nothing like
Guerrilla
we-
warfares were
you,
practiced.
yeah, you identify your objective and you achieve your objective, right? And you will not stop till you achieve your objective. It is as simple as that, and you will do whatever it takes to achieve that particular objective, right? So that's how war is, and there is no cessation till your objective is achieved. And so you see, armed forces or intervention of armed forces. There are many arms or there are many elements in us which a state can use to enforce its objective, right? They can be economic measures, right? They can be foreign influence measures that you can use, right? You can use your foreign policy to achieve your objective. You can use economic measures like sanctions to achieve your objective. Sanctions, trades, you can use that to achieve your objective. And most of the time is when all of these do not work out, right? That is when you call in the armed forces to achieve the objective, right? When you call in the armed forces, then you realize that nothing else has worked, and now we need to go out and get it done, right? And when you call in, then there is no holds barred. Right? तुम सब हट जाओ, हम खत्म करके आएंगे, right? So in that case, then there are no filters, right? So you need to get the objective achieved. That's it.
So this when we were preparing what I'm gonna ask and all of that, few of my friends were also helping. Maybe this question, maybe that question. So few of my friends were curious that how and where did the food come from? You won't be carrying food along with you guys, which is sufficient for 2-3 months or something.
Yeah, so there is an entire arm of the Army and the Air Force which does only that, right? It's called the Army Supply Corps, right?
Yeah.
So their aim is to ensure that the fighting force get what is required, and to ensure that the entire logistics lines is maintained, right? So when you are planning a campaign itself, right, this is a very integral part of planning the entire campaign. So how are you going to support their entire campaign in front, right? Yes, there will be times when there is a shortage. Yes, there will be times when you find on your own. But essentially, that is a very integral part of planning of how it goes up, right? So it is not only about food, right? How do I lay down my lines of communication, right? I need to talk to my people in the front, right? So how do I talk to them? Right? So that communication line has to be put down, laid out. Otherwise, my force will go up and now I'm not talking to them, right? How does that work out? Right? As a commander, if I'm out of touch with my force, then it doesn't make sense, right? So your logistics, if your vehicles are going up, right? Obviously, you need to your FOL also, fuel, oil, lubricants, all of that also has to go along. You can't have you can't have your vehicles up in the front without any fuel to go forward beyond that, right? Maneuverability get affected. Right? So all of this is very well planned when you're doing up a campaign also, and these are specialized, dedicated teams who do that, and their job is that, right? So if there is a specialized job to lay communication lines, there's a specialized job to lay your FOL, there's a specialized job to ensure that your food requirements are being met. There's a specialized role who's for ammunition, weapons are being met. So all of that comes in the planning phase.
So all the food, does it compensate the heavy training you guys have 24/7?
Yeah, so I think especially in training stage, I think a lot of nutritional value is catered for, right? We understand that it is far more strenuous, far more hectic. It requires a lot of more energy and more nutritional requirement are required, and all of this is catered for in your diet plan, in the food that you get every day, right? And in the ration that is allotted to you, all of that. But yes, even in the training and post training also, it caters for the kind of hectic stress that you're undergoing there.
You're again.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, I sort of tending to fade off, I think, in the end when I'm talking.
Yeah, nobody has ever complained this to you or something like that.
Not yet,
on
but
phone
I'll definitely take it as a feedback. Yeah.
For a radio broadcaster, I am very keen about sound. I'm very keen about the pitch and volume the opposite person is talking to. So coming to the significance of radio, as a radio presenter, I will on earth. Why would I miss that question? So that question.
So I think radio and armed forces have been associated for a very long time, right? And it's not about now. It goes back almost probably 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? And we've grown up listening to stories of. So when you're out in the front, right, on that last post, the only thing that you have for any kind of an entertainment is your radio, right? And I really do. I don't know if this is sort of an interesting anecdote, right? FM to nahi chalta hai. FM doesn't work, right? So what you have is you have either a medium wave or your short wave, right? And so now when you're out on the post, right? In olden days, at least before pre-Kargil or Kargil also, right? There was no way for your family to contact you. Right? The only way could be probably to write you a letter, and the letter would take somewhere close to 15 to 20 days to actually reach you, right? So, so radio was the only source of entertainment. Now you will turn on the radio, and every day at around 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, there used to be this radio messages which used to come, right? And people used to dedicate songs to their family members who are in the armed forces, who are at the post. Right. So, and that was your way of knowing that your family is, still cares for you, still love for you, because you're not talking to them, right? You're not. Every letter that you receive is 15 to 20 days old, because in the days of the post, right, it has to come by train to the army postal order, then वहाँ से वो तुम्हारे unit में जाएगा, unit से distribute होगा, फिर तुम्हारे post में आते 15 दिन हो जाता है. It is almost 15 days it reaches you. So people used to dedicate this song from Sonu Monu Pappu from Jalandhar to Jaspreet, who's sitting in Moga, right? So I think we have sort of grown up listening to those kind of programs on radio. So for a great period of time, your radio was the only link, was the only real-time link between people who were there in the front and their family back at home. And people would tune on every evening probably. So you can imagine them, right? They tune on every evening saying that shayad somebody has dedicated a song to me, right? And when you hear people dedicating songs to somebody else, again, you also feel like a part of it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that is, I think, they're definitely Fauji's in the front and radio have got a very long love relationship, which lasts over decades for us. Sometimes it is sad to say, I don't know, maybe we also have to do with age, but it has become now couples dedicate songs to each other on FM, right?
I was hoping
this is a spin-off. Yeah, this is a spin-off, this is a takeaway from that. Yeah, this is a draw out from that. That way people dedicate, and as a show of affection. Again, this is a show of affection. That was a show of affection. Yeah, that was a show of affection.
But you can think it this way. Normal people were inspired from you guys. So
absolutely. Yeah.
You guys were the senders.
Yeah.
You can take it that way. I've been holding that to say to it to you for so long, and the audience as well. So yeah, I guess they'll be all proud now. Whoever dedicated so far, or whoever is planning to dedicate. Man, I'm equally. Equally talented.
There's this kind of heritage, and there's this kind of heritage is there to it, type. Some retro effect type, old love sort of a thing.
Yeah, definitely. So. Is there a communication also? Is there a communication possibility as well via radio? Messages and all that?
Those you must have seen in old war stories and stuff like that, right? Wherever there is no line of communication, like for example, if there are people who are working across the border, right? There are, like for example, in the Second World War, there were people who were working inside France. There was the underground, right? And if the Allied forces had to communicate with them, they would send these coded messages on radio. And this message means this sort of a thing. So they will turn on every day evening, and there's usually a line of coded messages which will come. And whatever coded message is applicable to whoever, then they will take appropriate action on that. But not nowadays. It is not nowadays, because at that point of time there was no Wi-Fi, there's no internet, there's no data transfer, there was nothing like that. So now technology has become far more
developed and all. A part of me wishes I were born in that era and worked as a radio presenter in that era, because it is so adventurous. Passing on the messages to 4Gs, passing on the messages, dedicating songs to you guys. Man, that would have been so proud for all the radio presenters back then.
Yeah, it definitely had a lot of impact for the people at the front, right? And radio was though, and now you don't even get those batteries anymore. Those are huge batteries, right? They were like, more far thicker than the AA, AAA batteries.
This thick.
Yeah, and those, and they used to last you almost forever on a radio.
So transition from being in Air Force wing commander and then working for startups. If you
I think
put
it is
like you've done it in the beginning. Shucks.
Yeah, so I think transitioning from the armed forces, right, to there is one which is the government wala job, which is like the armed forces, which is very highly regulated, a lot of red tape, a lot of procedures, processes, rules, regulations that we have to follow, right? And then there is a PSU, right? If you could join a bank or something, again there is a lesser number of rules and regulations, but not as much as army, right? And there is this corporate job where even lesser number of rules, and then there is a startup culture, right? There are no rules. Sky is the limit. I mean, as long as you're creating an impact, you have by your own rules, right? And so that directly from an armed forces to a startup, right? It definitely was very, very exciting, right? It definitely kept me on the edge, wanting to learn and more. And suddenly you realize there's so many things that you can learn more about. And also I had some really good friends who helped me out. Like Vijay, who's the CEO of MyGate, right? He had already transitioned out earlier. He had left almost probably 8 to 10 years before me, right? And since I joined him, he has always been sort of helping out, this is the right thing, this is not the right thing, sort of thing, right? But a lot of things while being in the service, which we learned, right, which helped me a lot once I came out also, right? Things about perseverance, things about achieving your objective no matter what, right? Finally, at the end of the day, the job has to be done, right? That kind of a sense of not letting go till you achieve your objective. That was one really very good thing, right? The second was your ability to just be at it, right? Continuously, right? Your ability to put in those extra hours, right? The discipline that we learned from there, right? So that helped us in a very good stead. It helped us to categorize, to focus on what needs to be done, focus on what not needs to be done, right? That was a great learning for us, for me as well, right? A lot of things I still carry on from my Air Force days. The anecdotes, the experiences that I have really helped me to focus once I'm out of the service as well. Yeah, so that is how the transition sort of worked out for me.
So I have one personal question. Do you think all rules, Army has, as a serviceman, you will have so many rules, and here at startup it's completely opposite. So you think no rules works better, or full of rules works better?
So I have a different take on that, right? Okay. I believe that for the kind of role that you're doing in the Army, right, or the Air Force, you need to have those rules in place, right? Because finally in the armed forces, there is no second, there's no coming second, right? You die, right? At the end of this. I had to do that comparison with, flying an aircraft, right? And on ground, right? So, zameen pe gaadi kharab ho jata hai, so you take it to a side, right? On the road. In air, you can't do that, right? So, the rules and regulations are made to make sure that you have the best probability of, achieving your objective, right? So, in that sense, rules are good, right? And transition or exploring or innovation takes some amount of time, because there is an inherent lag in the organization to explore, to innovate, try something new. Because if that something new that you're trying fails, then the downside risks are very, very heavy, right? So you want to, every step that you take, you want to be very sure about where you're going. But in the outside world, I mean, now what is seeing is that if you don't fail, you will never learn, right? Um, that is the sense that I get when you're on the outside. You try, experiment, innovate, right? Apply yourself completely, put your best foot forward, then let's see what happens, right? So if you're outside on the civvy street, right, this perspective really works, right? But when you're in that context of being in the armed forces, that is not a bad way to go. I mean, that is definitely a good way to go, because the probability of successes are far higher, because the rules are made so that the probability increases a lot. But yes, there is definitely a scope for a lot of innovation there as well. And I think there are a lot of innovations which are happening also. I mean, the culture of innovation is starting to come in into the armed forces as well. People want to try something new. People are trying something new in a controlled environment, but still they are trying a lot of new stuff that is happening. But
this
left up to me, I would definitely prefer a startup for a world.
Really?
There's so much to learn. Yeah, I mean, after 20 years in the armed forces, you've predominantly learned a lot of stuff, right? Here, we are starting from zero, right? And then we interact with a lot of millennials like you guys, you know, and we learn so much from you guys. It's so different out there, and you're like, suddenly from when you have spent 20 years in the armed forces, you feel that sponge is already full of water, right? Just it cannot take in too much of water.
Oh, yeah.
But when you step out, you're like a squeezed out sponge, ready to absorb anything that is coming your way, right?
Yeah.
So it's really exciting to be out, and it's really exciting to keep learning a lot of these things on a daily basis.
So what is that?
In a certain sense, you feel like you're 25, 26, 24, where you're looking out to learn from everything around you, right? And you're just soaking up everything on a daily basis.
I'm so happy to see you that you're that inquisitive and all ready to learn and new things every day. So happy. So, now you're telling that this outside world is more exciting and all of it. I want to ask, from that inside world of your armed forces, is there something you would want this world to incorporate in their daily lives? It can be anything, smallest tip. Yeah, world becomes
I think
a
if I
better
have
place.
if I have to go back to my armed forces experience, right, we definitely, again, it is a sort of ode to my friends that I've lost there, right? I've lost a lot of good friends while in service, right? So if it has taught me one thing, it has taught me to absorb and enjoy every moment that you have now, right? That is something that always you prefer to. I mean, life is too uncertain to be doing inconsequential things, right? Relationships, right, are more important than anything else, right? Because that is what matters at the end, right? That is what completes you as a person, right? Your ability to learn new things, right? Always keep learning. Don't say that sense of ego. I know, I've achieved there, I've been there, I've done that, right? I think that is another learning that I've taken away from service, right? There is so much more to learn. You can keep learning, right? So these are two things, right? Value your today and live your life today. Value your today. Tomorrow, we really don't know. Yes, definitely do plan for tomorrow, but don't sacrifice your today for an endless tomorrow, sort of a thing, right? So relationships do matter. People do matter. Right? And so that is probably my takeaway. You asked that Fauji, right? What he would give to spend a week with his family back home, right? And imagine you are spending every day with your family and you don't appreciate that, right? So probably those are the key takeaways that one would have, right? Saal mein he comes, in a whole year he comes home probably a month or so, right? So how much he yearns to come back home and spend that 1 month with his family, right? And we are spending every day with our families and we are having fights with them, yeah. We could definitely work on that, right?
Oh yes. You are talking to an adolescent phase adult. So yeah, I'm totally relating it. If my mom was around, no, she'd be corner eyeing me like, are you hearing me? Yeah, that is there. Yeah. So you keep narrating all the stories from your service days to your son. That is why he's already into NCC and all?
Yeah, I mean, many of the stories that he's been through. I mean, I just left. He's already 15 years old now, and I left service, 2018. So he has been a part of a lot of those postings as well. So he's seen stuff which has happened. Right? He's with me. He was posted with me when I was in service. Right? So he's seen that army way of life, and there is definitely an influence, like how I was influenced by my predecessors. Right? And he also tends to pick up a lot of stuff from here and there. But yeah, so yes, and then he studied in army public school for like till the 6th or 7th standard. So again, that also tends to influence your thought process. Yeah. So yeah, we definitely share a lot of life lessons from the armed forces with each other.
That's amazing.
We try to talk a lot about that, and
That's amazing.
yeah, I believe that he's learned to live those experiences rather than. Sometimes we have to put him back. Here, itna casual bhi mat ban. Don't live too much on today also. Just thoda to aage ka soch le types. So yeah, but predominantly, yeah, we enjoy our today a lot. Yes.
That's amazing. So I guess this brings us to the end. I've asked all the questions
Awesome, Malekya.
I've had.
Yeah, thanks, but I had a great time having a conversation with you. It didn't sound like an interview or something, right? So your editor has a lot of work to do, right? So we gotta cut out a lot of stuff.
I don't think so. Whatever we spoke was outright so perfect. I don't think so. He has. I mean, I don't want to say it out loud.
Because he's going to be seeing it and he'll say, "Acha, bata ko kuch nahi hai, bas niqal laga do."
ऐसे दे दे. Looking forward to meeting someday, sir.
Same here, Alekya. Same here. Nice chatting up with you. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you so much,
Thanks
sir.
for your time. Thanks a lot.